No, no,
Don't touch it! Don't touch it!
Hello and welcome to a new episode of RT Essentials. I'm Mark Ellis, and today we're going to talk about a little something called science fiction horror, which began centuries ago in literature. This subgenre, which often involves topics like alien invasions, mad scientists, and experiments gone awry, started showing up in films as far back as 1918, and it's delivered some of the most legendary work ever since. And as we'll learn today, some of those films can be extra scary with one-word titles like Alien, or Cube, or Mimic, or The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That last one might have been a few different words, but anyway, it's time to take this science fiction and horror love child of a genre for a little spin with the best sci-fi horror thrillers of all time. The Fly. And creating some buzz on this list is the 1986 film The Fly. Directed and co-written by David Cronenberg and produced by Mel Brooks, this movie is loosely based on George Langland's 1957 short story and the ensuing 1958 film of the same name. Help me, help me. Jeff Goldblum stars as scientist Seth Brundle, who decides to test his recently completed teleportation device on himself. Little did he know, a housefly would also make its way into the process, and its cells would start to take over Seth's body. As you might imagine, his girlfriend, played by Geena Davis, isn't really cool with these new developments. Director Cronenberg, a Canadian filmmaker credited with helping create what is known as the body horror or biological horror subgenre, was the first choice for the job. But he was working on what would become Arnold Schwarzenegger's Total Recall film at the time, and didn't get involved until months later when he was off that project. And he only agreed to direct if he could rewrite the script. Cronenberg worked alongside effects man Chris Wallace, who designed the creatures in Gremlins and was in charge of the movie's extensive special effects. And those special effects, along with Goldblum's performance, are two of the biggest reasons why this certified fresh film was a hit with critics and fans. It grossed nearly $61 million against a $9 million budget and became one of Cronenberg's biggest commercial successes. A sequel, accurately titled The Fly 2, was released in 1989, and although Jeff Goldblum didn't return, this new movie was directed by the previous film's effects man, Chris Wallace. The Fly won an Academy Award for Best Makeup, but given the Academy's tendency to ignore horror films of the time, many fans of the genre thought Jeff Goldblum was robbed of a nomination. And, well, of course he was. The Thing, 1982. Here's the thing about the next movie on this list, in that it's actually called The Thing. The name of the movie is The Thing. Got it? Moving on. Released in 1982 and directed by John Carpenter, this film is based on the 1938 novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr. It stars Kurt Russell with a supporting cast that includes Wilford Brimley, Keith David, and Richard Dysart, and follows a group of American research scientists in remote Antarctica who encounter some sort of, thing that can assume the shape of its victims. Development began in the mid-1970s and ultimately went through a handful of directors, each with their own take on the story, including John Landis, until John Carpenter signed on to direct after the success of his 1978 slasher film, Halloween. The project was put on hold at one point, but finally got off the ground after the success of Ridley Scott's Alien, which we'll talk about later, and filming began in August of 1981. It lasted 12 weeks, mostly taking place on refrigerated sets in Los Angeles, plus locations in Alaska and British Columbia.
Windows, blast him!
$1.5 million of the film's $15 million budget was spent on the special effects for the creature, which was a mix of food products, rubber, chemicals, and mechanical parts. Unfortunately, this cleverly constructed shape-shifting alien was against a much more family-friendly alien by the name of E.T., and The Thing was released to poor box office numbers to go with plenty of negative reviews. But it eventually found its audience through home video and TV airings over the years and has gained a cult following. That's opened the door for a full-on franchise that includes haunted house attractions, board games, comic book sequels, a video game, and a prequel movie. And this now certified fresh film has ultimately been reassessed as one of the best sci-fi horror films ever, with a critics' consensus that calls it a tense sci-fi thriller rife with compelling tension and some remarkable makeup effects. Annihilation.
Don't react.
Next up on this list of the best sci-fi horror thrillers is the 2018 film Annihilation. This one was written and directed by Alex Garland, a longtime novelist and screenwriter, in his second directorial effort after 2014's Ex Machina. Annihilation is based on the 2014 novel of the same name by Jeff Vandermeer, but Alex Garland had only read it once and decided to write the adaptation, quote, like a dream of the book. Natalie Portman plays a biologist and former soldier who joins a dangerous mission to uncover what happened to her husband inside Area X, a sinister and mysterious phenomenon that's expanding across the American coastline. And it's as dangerous and mind-bending as it is beautiful to look at. Portman, who once said that she would never do a horror film but eventually changed her mind for this and Black Swan, stars alongside Jennifer Jason Leigh, Gina Rodriguez, Tessa Thompson, Benedict Wong, and Oscar Isaac. In other words, it's a who's who of the MCU Phase 4.
Our bodies and our minds will be fragmented into their smallest parts until not one part remains. Annihilation.
And speaking of Oscar Isaac, he was filming The Last Jedi at the same time as this one on an adjacent studio lot, using his Star Wars trailer for both projects and even filming scenes for both films in the same day. After a poor test screening, one studio exec thought Annihilation would be too complicated or intellectual for audiences and demanded changes to Portman's character and the ending. But neither Alex Garland or producer Scott Rudin, who had Final Cut, agreed with those notes, and the changes were never made. Many feel this led to a deal being made with Netflix to distribute the film internationally shortly after it opened in theaters. That led to just $43 million at the box office, a major flop, despite its certified fresh status with critics and being a hit with the fans who did see it. The Terminator.
I'm a friend of Sarah Connor. I was told that she's here. Could I see her, please?
No, can't see her. She's making a statement.
Where is she?
Look, it may take a while. You want to wait? There's a bench over there.
I'll be back.
Being sent from the future, well, technically the past, to the next spot on this list is 1984's The Terminator. The film was directed by James Cameron, who came up with a premise after a fever dream he had while making his first film, Piranha 2: The Spawning. This film follows a cyborg assassin known as a Terminator, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who travels from 2029 to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton. Her unborn son poses an eventual threat to Skynet, an artificial intelligence system that's going to be responsible for a nuclear holocaust. Filming was delayed while Schwarzenegger finished Conan the Destroyer, so James Cameron worked on scripts for Rambo: First Blood Part 2 and Aliens in the meantime.
Wash day tomorrow. Nothing clean, right?
Nothing clean, right?
Hey, I think this guy's a couple cans short of a six-pack.
You're close. Give them to me, now.
As for this script, the initial outline involved a second Terminator that was made of liquid metal, but Cameron felt the technology of the time wasn't ready. Although that would eventually come to pass in the 1991 sequel, Terminator 2: Judgment Day. But the effects they did use for this film, which included stop-motion animation and miniatures, were created by a team led by the legendary Stan Winston. And the result is a film that is credited with launching James Cameron's career and officially cementing Arnold Schwarzenegger's status as a leading man. Although things could have been different, considering Sylvester Stallone and Mel Gibson both reportedly turned down the Terminator role, and O.J. Simpson was suggested, but it was decided that he wouldn't be believable as a killer. Ironically enough, the film's success led to a franchise consisting of several sequels, a television series, comic books, novels, and video games. And it all started with the Terminator's famous line, "I'll be back," which was actually originally scripted as "I'll come back." The more you know. The Invisible Man. Making itself seen next on this list is The Invisible Man from 2020. This is a reboot of the Invisible Man film franchise, the first of which was released in 1933 and all adapted from the novel of the same name by H.G. Wells, first published in 1897. Relative unknown Oliver Jackson Cohen was cast as the titular character, having just appeared in the Haunting of Hill House miniseries. He plays a crazed scientist who, after staging his own suicide, uses his power to become invisible and terrorize his ex-girlfriend, played by Elizabeth Moss. The filmmakers used a combination of new age CGI magic and old school techniques to bring the Invisible Man to life, while the rest of the film was brought to life by director Leigh Whannell, who was born in Australia, where this film was shot. Whannell, who broke into Hollywood as an actor with films like Saw, has also directed the horror flicks Insidious Chapter 3 and the sci-fi movie Upgrade. So he's qualified in both genres to combine them here now is what I'm trying to tell you.
Get back in bed, now.
Before Whannell came along, though, development for this film began way back in 2007. At the time, there were plans of an expanded dark universe for Universal, with Johnny Depp playing the Invisible Man. But those plans officially fell apart after The Mummy was considered to be a flop 10 years later in 2017. And the new plan, or pivot if you will, was to focus more on filmmakers bringing their own unique approach to the characters in standalone films. This also meant steering away from big budgets, which rarely works in horror anyway. And that's why, with a budget of just $7 million for The Invisible Man, its strong box office was a huge win. This certified fresh film grossed $142 million worldwide, and that's with a theatrical release that was cut short by COVID-19 and switched to streaming just 3 weeks after it opened. And like our old pal the Critics' Consensus says, this film proves that sometimes the classic source material for a fresh reboot can be hiding in plain sight. Cube.
Well, he's right. Not prime. Stop! In front of you!
Taking shape as the next film on this list is the 1997 sci-fi thriller Cube. This independent Canadian film was co-written and directed by Vincenzo Natali, who also did the 2009 sci-fi horror film Splice. If the premise was a joke, you could say that a scientist, a former cop, a math genius, a master of escapes, and an architect walk into a prison of cubic cells and have no idea how they got there. But this is no joke, and that's actually quite terrifying. In fact, some of the cubes are booby-trapped, and the prisoners have to try and use their combined skill sets to figure out a way to escape, or they're gonna die. This film has been compared to, and was reportedly inspired by, a 1961 episode of the original Twilight Zone called 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. In this one, it's 6 main characters, all named after a real-world prison. And through various iterations of the script, the imprisoned group took on a number of different forms, including all being accountants or all being criminals.
I don't want to die. I'm just being realistic. You think they'd go to all the trouble to build this thing if we could just walk out?
You think they would have left us clues and let us beat it so far if there wasn't a way out?
You think we matter or we don't?
Put us out of your misery so we can get on with getting out of here.
No, you're not getting out of here.
Yes, we are.
No, you're not.
Yes, we are!
There is no way out of here!
Cube was filmed on a Toronto soundstage over the course of 20 days, with the majority of it being shot on a handheld camera. The cube in the film was conceived by mathematician David W. Pravica, who also served as a math consultant for the production. and only one full-size cube with 14-foot walls was actually built for filming, and they changed the colors of each room by using sliding panels. Despite a modest $9 million haul with the worldwide box office, this film has gone on to achieve cult status. One of those 90s deep cuts where if you know, you know. You know? It was followed by a sequel, Cube 2 Hypercube, and a prequel, Cube 0, both released in the early 2000s. There was also an American remake rumored to be in the works back in 2015, but nothing has come of it just yet. But fear not, all you cube heads, or cubers, Lil Cubies, whatever you want to call yourselves, there was a Japanese remake released in 2021, so, go cube it up. Event Horizon.
Miller? Captain Miller? I got some problems here!
Be with me. Forever.
Next, we'll keep it in 1997, but head into space with the film Event Horizon. This one was directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, best known for the Resident Evil film franchise, and stars Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, Kathleen Quinlan, and Jolie Richardson. The movie is about a spacecraft, named the Event Horizon, that suddenly reappears after having vanished years earlier, and the crew that is sent to investigate it. What they find is a seemingly abandoned ship that has some serious horrors lurking in its corridors. The English director Anderson found success with 1995's Mortal Kombat and was hounded with new offers to direct. He ultimately turned down the Mortal Kombat sequel, as well as 2000's X-Men, so he could put his focus into an R-rated horror flick instead of his standard PG-13 fare.
If what Dr. Wade tells us is true, this ship has been beyond the boundaries of our universe, of known scientific reality. Who knows where it's been, what it's seen, and what it's brought back with it.
And looking to avoid being a copycat of 1979's Alien, Anderson rewrote the script with the idea of a classic haunted house movie in his head, looking to films like 1963's The Haunting and Stanley Kubrick's The Shining for inspiration. Unfortunately, Event Horizon had a bit of a troubled production, in part because it had become clear that some movie called Titanic wasn't going to be ready in time. Because of that, Paramount rushed the filming and editing of this movie, hastily cutting about 35 minutes of footage from the original cut in the process. The film was considered a commercial failure, grossing just $42 million on a $60 million budget. But people began to see the light during its initial DVD release. In fact, things were going so well that Paramount called up Anderson to see if he could prep a director's cut DVD with all that deleted footage, only to discover that most of it was either lost or destroyed. Oops. Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
See?
Grabbing the next spot on this list of the best sci-fi horror thrillers is 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This film was directed by Philip Kaufman and is based on the 1955 novel The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, which was previously adapted into the 1956 film of the same name. Featuring stars like Donald Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum, and Leonard Nimoy, this movie tells the story of a San Francisco health inspector and his colleague who discover that humans are being replaced by alien duplicates, but devoid of human emotion. Behind the scenes, sound editor Ben Burt, who is coming off of Star Wars the year before, was brought in along with the Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia to help create the sounds and banjo music in the movie. The special effects seen in the film were created live for the camera, while the director Kaufman instructed his actors to fill the time between dialogue with facial expressions. This version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers comes with a twist ending, something that Kaufman kept secret right up until filming, telling Sutherland the night before the scene was shot. And rumor has it that studio execs didn't find out until later when a screening was happening at George Lucas's house. You gotta love Hollywood. The movie hit theaters over Christmas weekend in 1978 because nothing says happy holidays like body snatching, and pulled in a decent haul at the box office with some varied reviews. But Critical reception for this now certified fresh film has greatly improved over the years, with many publications calling it one of the greatest remakes and one of the best sci-fi horror movies ever. And perhaps the highest honor it can receive was being parodied in a 2012 episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. Enough said. Mimic.
Sometimes an insect will evolve to mimic its predator. A fly can look like a spider. A caterpillar can look like a snake. The Judas evolved to mimic its predator. Us.
And because 1997 was apparently the year for sci-fi horror flicks, next on this list is 1997's Mimic. This film was directed and co-written by Guillermo del Toro and inspired by a 1942 short story of the same name by award-winning science fiction author Donald A. Wollheim. The movie is about an evolutionary biologist, played by Mira Sorvino, who's trying to stop a cockroach spread plague that threatens to take out the children of New York City. But in the process, her and her team create a legion of insects that evolve to mimic and hunt humans. I'm sorry, human hunting bugs? Yeah, that's gonna be a big no from me, dog. Mimic also features Josh Brolin, who appeared in another Miramax horror film the same year with Night Watch. Plus, it marks the feature film debut for Norman Reedus, who went on to star in the hit series The Walking Dead as Daryl.
Do you have the time? Sir, the time?
One Miramax executive reportedly argued with Guillermo del Toro regarding the film's tone, claiming it wasn't scary enough. Ultimately, del Toro was not given final cut privileges and didn't approve of the film as released. But a director's cut, running 6 minutes longer than the original, was eventually put out in 2011. The original version was ultimately a disappointment at the box office, although it was followed by 2 direct-to-video sequels, neither of which involved del Toro. But as this fresh film has been looked upon more favorably throughout the years, a TV adaptation was announced in 2020 with Paul W.S. Anderson directing the pilot. No word on the project lately, but hopefully someone will be mimicking this one soon. Alien.
Oh God, it's moving right towards you. Move! Get out of there! Towards you, move! Down! Move down! Move down! Get out! Oh. No, not that way! The other way! God!
And finally, making contact as the last film on our list is 1979's Alien. This one was directed by Ridley Scott and just his second feature film. It follows the crew of a commercial starship who are awakened from a deep sleep in space to find that a deadly alien life form has joined them for a ride. This movie marked the first lead role for Sigourney Weaver, who came in with Broadway experience but as a relative unknown in film. Scott said that the role of Ripley came down to Weaver and Meryl Streep, with Weaver ultimately winning the job. Meanwhile, for the other lead role, Harrison Ford turned down the part of Captain Dallas, which eventually went to Tom Skerritt. Scott said the concept for Alien was inspired partly by Star Wars a couple years earlier, which deviated from the pristine future often depicted in science fiction films of the time.
Come on, baby. Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you. Come on.
Filming took place over the course of 14 weeks in the summer and fall of 1978, with what was a pretty low budget at the time of $11 million. In fact, some of the laser lights seen in the alien ship were reportedly borrowed from the band The Who were testing out lasers for their show on the soundstage right next door. That's convenient. And Alien went on to become a commercial success and launched a media franchise that includes novels, comic books, your video games, your toys, and more films, like sequels, prequels, and even a crossover with the Predator franchise. I think Paul W.S. Anderson has a hand in that too. Plus, the very certified fresh film, which won an Oscar for Best Visual Effects, has cemented a legacy as one of the greatest science fiction horror films of all time, even being selected for preservation in the United States Film Registry, which is a mic drop. Well, there you have it, the best sci-fi horror thrillers. I know, you think this list maybe should have looked a little different. Weren't there 12 monkeys that were involved? But it's only 10 movies we get here, and it's a tough decision to make. So let us know the sci-fi horror thrillers that you love, and in the meantime, just remember these words: Thing, Fly, Cube, Mimic, Terminator, and Body. And Snatchers. And Invasion. Thanks for tuning in to RT Essentials. I'm Mark Ellis, and I hope I'll be back.